They found him at dawn, slumped beside the river like something the night had tried to carry away, and failed. The sisters had been gathering reeds when Tala saw the glint of metal half buried in the mud, a rifle barrel, and then a hand, pale and still. Nayeli dropped to her knees without fear, pressing her ear to his chest until she caught the faint, ragged breath of life. His shirt was torn from a bullet wound near the ribs, his skin cold as river stone, his lips cracked with thirst. "He's one of them," Tala whispered, glancing toward the horizon where smoke rose from the army's outpost. Nayeli didn't answer. Her hands were already moving, tearing her shawl into strips, cleaning the blood as though she were undoing a curse. The man's name came out between his gasps. Elias Ward. He was a scout, he said, caught in a crossfire between soldiers and Yavapai warriors. The moment his eyes met Nayeli's, something quiet passed between them, a question neither could ask. Tala fetched water, still watching him with suspicion and wonder, her pulse quick from seeing a stranger who looked too human to hate. By evening, they had carried him to their hut and hidden him under woven cedar mats before the tribe's guards made their rounds. Chief Ohan would not forgive this easily. Harboring an enemy was a danger to them all. But Nayeli's calm defied fear. "He's not our enemy tonight," she said simply, pressing a warm cloth to Elias's chest as the river wind slipped through the doorway. He stirred, whispering something about a ridge and a white flag, words that made no sense yet felt heavy with guilt. When he fell asleep, Nayeli sat beside him, tracing the scar along his arm that wasn't new, that spoke of older wars inside him. Tala, standing in the corner, folded her arms and whispered, "You trust too easily, sister." Nayeli smiled faintly. "It is not trust. It is mercy. The land keeps those who don't deserve to die yet." Outside, coyotes howled from the mesa, the sound echoing through the valley like a warning. Inside, the flicker of firelight touched Elias's face, revealing a man both broken and dangerous, a man whose story would soon tear the sisters apart. By morning, the scent of cedar smoke and crushed herbs filled the small hut, and the world outside had begun to stir with drums from the village square. Nayeli ground willow bark and whispered words she'd learned from her mother, pressing the bitter paste over Elias's wound. He flinched once, then looked at her as though trying to remember a time when someone had touched him without asking for anything in return. Tala watched from the corner, her arms crossed, every movement in the room somehow too slow for her restless heart. "He should be gone by now," she muttered. "Father will see the tracks." Nayeli didn't look up. "He can barely stand. The wound opened again last night." Elias's voice came rough and quiet. "You risk much for a stranger." Nayeli met his eyes and said, "A life is not a stranger." For a moment he saw something fierce behind her calm, a strength that had nothing to do with mercy. She told him the truth then, that if Chief Ohan found him, there would be no forgiveness, not even for her. "You will leave when the river runs gold at sunset. Until then, you are under my promise." She said it like a vow before God, and Elias, for the first time in years, felt the weight of an oath he hadn't earned. Tala left the hut in silence, angered by what she couldn't name, and wandered down to the water where dragonflies hovered above the reeds. In the village, word was already circling that a white scout had gone missing after a skirmish, and soldiers were riding the edge of Yavapai territory asking questions with their rifles. By dusk, Elias tried to rise and failed, his body shaking from fever. Nayeli cooled his forehead, her fingers steady as she said, "If you live, you will not waste it." "And if I die?" he whispered. "Then you will die knowing someone saw you as more than a weapon." He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, The sound of her voice was stronger than pain. Tala stood at the doorway then, her shadow long across the dirt floor, watching the way her sister bent close to the man who might destroy them all. And in her heart something fierce began to bloom, a mix of fear, envy, and a longing she would soon mistake for fate. 2 days passed before Elias could sit up without trembling, and by then the entire village seemed to hum with suspicion. Children had seen strangers near the river, riders from the fort, and every whisper drew closer to the sisters' hut. Nayeli remained calm, tending to her patient with a quiet devotion that unsettled Tala more than the danger itself. Elias had begun to speak between his fever dreams, fragments of battlefields, names of men she didn't know, an apology he repeated like a prayer. "You talk in your sleep," Tala said one afternoon, crouched by his side as Nayeli stepped out to fetch water. Elias gave her a tired half-smile. "Then you know more of me than most do awake." His voice had softened since that first night, the edge worn down by gratitude. Tala leaned closer, studying the scar that cut across his collarbone. "Is it true you were one of them, the men who hunt us?" "I was," he said quietly. "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm hunted by them too." His answer caught her off guard, like a gust through dry grass. For a moment her anger and fear slipped away, replaced by the strange pull of pity. When Nayeli returned, she caught her sister's eyes and saw the spark there, faint but dangerous. That evening, while the tribe gathered around the council fire to discuss the soldiers' advance, Tala sat outside the hut, listening to Elias hum a tune too soft for words. She imagined him once free of the pain, standing tall, his eyes not clouded with guilt. She imagined what it would be to have someone like him look at her as he did Nayeli, with trust, with the quiet of belonging. The thought made her chest ache. Later, when Nayeli warned her to stay away from him at night, Tala laughed bitterly. "You think I'm a child." "I think you don't know what kind of man you're trying to save," Nayeli replied. "He's already lost too much." Tala turned away, her voice low. "Then maybe I'll give him something back." The words lingered in the smoke-sweet air, carried out into the dusk where the first owl called. Inside the hut, Elias stirred again, his hand brushing the edge of the woven mat, as though feeling the weight of every choice yet to come. The fourth morning broke under a sky the color of pewter, heavy with the promise of rain. Elias woke to find the hut empty, the air sharp with the scent of smoke and coming thunder. Outside, voices rose from the village, men preparing for a hunt to track the soldiers who had been seen cutting through their grazing lands. Nayeli had gone to plead with her father, urging him not to send the young warriors. She knew the fort's rifles would turn bravery into mourning. Tala stayed behind, restless, her hands shaking as she wrapped food for Elias. "You should leave," she whispered, glancing towards the ridgeline, "before they find you here." He studied her face, trying to read the urgency beneath her words. "And leave you to answer for me?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then said, "If you stay, you'll only bring death to our door." But her voice trembled, betraying what she didn't mean to say. That part of her didn't want him to go. A sudden crash of thunder shook the ground, followed by the first drops of rain. The tribe's riders galloped past, spears raised, the storm rolling behind them like an army. When Nayeli returned, her hair soaked and her face pale, she found Elias standing at the door, leaning on a carved staff, ready to follow the men into the hills. "You can barely walk," she said, gripping his arm. "They'll kill you before the rain stops." "If I can keep them from dying first, I'll try," he replied. She held his gaze a long moment, then nodded once, knowing argument was useless. Together they climbed the muddy path toward the ridge, Tala trailing behind despite Nayli's warning. The sky opened fully, turning the trail into a river of red clay, the wind howling through the canyons. From the high ground they saw flashes of movement, figures, distant gunfire, and smoke curling from the trees below. Nayeli whispered a prayer, her lips barely moving. Elias steadied her as the storm thickened around them, their breath lost in the roar. When the gunfire ceased and silence followed, the truth hit like the rain's last strike. Half the hunting party was gone, and the line between enemy and protector had blurred completely. Down the slope, a soldier's horse broke free, riderless, its saddle marked with the crest of the fort. Elias stared at it, realizing the men he once called brothers had found this place after all. That night the rain finally stopped, leaving the land glazed with silver light and the smell of wet earth clinging to the air. The survivors had returned before dawn, bringing silence instead of stories. 2 wounded men, one body draped in a soaked blanket. Nayeli tended to them until her hands trembled, her eyes hollow from the weight of loss. Tala sat apart, the fire painting her face in flickering gold, her thoughts circling Elias like restless hawks. When the village fell asleep, she slipped from her mat and stepped into the quiet. The moon hung low, swollen over the dark ridge where mist pooled among the pines. She found him outside the hut, shirt undone, binding his wound again. He looked older under the moonlight, his shoulders tense with something unspoken. "You should be resting," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured, glancing at her with that same weary kindness that made her heart twist. The air between them tightened with every breath. "You risked everything for us," she said. "For my sister." "And for you," he answered before he could stop himself. Her pulse stilled. In that silence, all the warnings Nayeli had given her crumbled like ash. She stepped closer, touching the bandage at his ribs, tracing the edge where skin met cloth. "You said you were hunted," she whispered. "What if I said I'd hide you?" He caught her wrist, not roughly, but with the strength of someone fighting himself. "You don't understand what I've done," he said, voice low. "You don't know what I carry." "Then let me," she replied, eyes wet, voice trembling. He should have walked away. Instead, he leaned forward until her breath touched his. And the night swallowed everything, the fear, the guilt, the promise he'd made to her sister. When the door creaked open, they broke apart too late. Nayeli stood there, her face pale in the firelight, her hands still red from healing. For a long moment no one spoke. Not even the wind dared to move. Then she turned without a word, leaving the doorway open behind her. Tala reached out, but Elias caught her hand, whispering, "Don't." His voice was hollow now, the warmth gone. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder rolled again, though the sky was clear. The storm had only changed its shape. By dawn, the hush of the village was heavy enough to drown a man's breath. Nayeli hadn't spoken since that night. She moved through the camp like a ghost, tending the wounded in silence, her calm now sharper than anger. Tala tried to reach her once, but the look her sister gave stopped her cold. Elias remained outside the hut, ashamed, staring at the river that had once felt like a refuge. The reflection of the rising sun trembled across its surface, as if even the light wanted to hide from him. He didn't see the riders until they were close, 4 men in blue coats, their horses slick with mud, led by Lieutenant Graves. The sound of their approach sent a ripple through the camp. Children were pulled inside, men reached for rifles, and Chief Ohan stepped forward with a calm that made the soldiers hesitate. Graves dismounted with practiced arrogance. "We're looking for a deserter," he said, eyes narrowing on Elias. "Scout named Ward. Went missing after the ambush 2 weeks back." Elias's stomach twisted, but before he could speak, Nayeli stepped from the healer's hut, her voice even. "No one by that name here." Graves smirked, glancing between the sisters. "I was told he might have gone native. Hard to tell, isn't it, when men lose their way out here?" His gaze lingered on Tala, and Elias's fists clenched. "You've got no right here," Chief Ohan said. Graves shrugged. "Right comes with firepower." He dropped a folded paper onto the ground, an order marked with the army's seal, and turned to Elias. "You come with us, and maybe your record stays clean. Refuse, and I'll burn this village down before sundown." The words sliced through the stillness like a knife. Elias met his eyes, then looked toward Nayeli and Tala. He saw in them 2 worlds he could no longer keep separate. "I'll come," he said quietly. Tala gasped, stepping forward, but Nayeli caught her wrist. Graves grinned, satisfied, as Elias walked toward his horse with the slow resignation of a man heading to his own hanging. The soldiers turned their mounts, and the thunder of hooves faded into the distance, leaving the village frozen. When the sound finally disappeared, Nayeli released her sister's arm and said only, "He has chosen his path." But Tala's tears had already begun to fall, because deep down she knew he hadn't chosen anything. He was just trying to protect what they still had left. The trail to the fort wound through canyons still slick from the last storm, and Elias rode in silence between the soldiers, his wrists bound with raw hide and his thoughts burning hotter than the sun overhead. Graves rode beside him, smug and certain. "You should have stayed dead by that river, Ward. But I'll admit you've got a talent for getting into trouble women can't resist cleaning up." Elias didn't answer. His mind was with the sisters, Nayeli's eyes, cold with disappointment, and Tala's trembling hands reaching out as he was led away. By midday, they reached a bluff overlooking the valley, where the fort's outline shimmered like iron under heat. There, Elias saw something that made his heart stop. A column of smoke rising from the direction of the Yavapai village. Graves grinned. "The chief refused our patrol last month. Maybe they'll listen better this time." Rage tore through Elias's exhaustion. "You said you'd leave them alone." "I said maybe," Graves replied. "Depends how you behave." When the lieutenant turned his back, Elias kicked his heel hard into the horse's flank and wrenched the reins free. The animal bolted, startled, sending up a storm of dust. A gun fired, another shouted, and in the confusion, Elias cut the rope binding his wrists with the edge of a saddle buckle. Pain screamed through his ribs, but he didn't stop until the canyon swallowed him. He rode through brush and rock, barely breathing, until the wind carried a sound he feared most, the crack of fire and the cries of panic. The village was burning. Men fought to save the huts. Women gathered children and what little they could carry. Chief Ohan's spear gleamed through smoke, thrown against the approaching soldiers. Nayeli was there too, guiding the wounded toward the river. Elias leapt from his horse, grabbing a fallen rifle. "Get back!" he shouted, firing a warning shot that made both sides freeze. Graves rode in behind him, livid. "Ward, stand down!" "Not this time," Elias said, turning the rifle toward him. The wind roared through the canyon, lifting sparks into the sky. "You said these people would be safe." Graves sneered. "They're not people. They're—" He didn't finish. Elias fired once, the echo shattering the air. The lieutenant fell from his horse, dead before the dust settled. No one moved. For a long moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Nayeli's voice rose through the chaos, soft but clear. "The fire will spread," she said. We must save the living first. And in that single order, Elias realized redemption would not come from the shot he'd fired, but from what he would do next. The flames moved faster than anyone could run. Dry brush and wind turned the village into a roaring furnace that painted the sky orange against the fading day. Elias dropped the rifle and joined the line of men passing buckets from the river, his hands blistering from heat and ash. Nayeli worked beside him without a word, her face streaked with soot, her calm unbroken even as sparks landed in her hair. Tala ran through the smoke, searching for children trapped inside the healer's hut, where bundles of dried herbs now burned like torches. Elias saw her vanish into the firelight and sprinted after her, but the air was thick, choking, and his lungs screamed for air. He heard Nayeli shout his name once, the sound sharp with fear. He burst through the doorway just as the roof began to sag. Finding Tala dragging a small boy whose leg was pinned under a beam. Together they pulled him free and stumbled out, collapsing near the riverbank. The boy lived. Tala coughed until she could speak, then looked up at the sky, tears cutting clean lines through the ash on her face. "Where's Nayeli?" she asked. Elias turned toward the burning center of the village and saw her, still inside the flames, carrying an old woman too weak to walk. He shouted her name, but the roar drowned everything. She pushed the woman toward the door, then turned back as if to fetch one more life. The moment the roof gave way, the fire leapt higher than the trees. Elias ran, ignoring the heat tearing his skin, but the wall of fire forced him back. The hut collapsed in a burst of sparks, and the scream that followed wasn't human. It was the kind of sound that only comes from a soul being torn open. The rain returned then, sudden and fierce, drenching the embers, hissing over charred ground. When it was over, the village was a shadow of itself, black smoke curling against the sky. Elias fell to his knees where the hut had been, his voice broken by smoke and grief. Tala came to him, clutching the boy's small hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. She knelt beside him and whispered, "She saved us all." He looked at her, face streaked with tears and soot, and said nothing, because every word he had left belonged to the woman who would never speak again. The next morning dawned gray and still, the smoke drifting low over the ruins like a veil refusing to lift. The tribe gathered by the river to bury the dead. 3 men, 2 children, and Nayeli. The ground was too wet for digging, so they laid her in a hollow of earth lined with sage and willow branches. Chief Ohan stood silent, his weathered face unreadable, while Tala knelt beside the shroud, her fingers tracing the shape of her sister's hand beneath the cloth. Elias stood a few paces away, hat in hand, his eyes red from more than smoke. When the old man finally spoke, his words were quiet enough to make the river stop moving. "My daughter gave her life to save yours, white man. The land keeps balance. How will you pay what you owe?" Elias swallowed hard, every breath scraping his chest. "By telling the truth," he said. He stepped forward and faced them all. "The soldiers didn't find this place by accident. They found it because of me. I was meant to mark your lands on a map, to tell them where to strike." Gasps and curses rippled through the crowd, but he didn't stop. "I thought I could end the blood by helping them find what they wanted, but they wanted everything." Chief Ohan's eyes burned like flint. "Then you brought the fire." Elias nodded. "And I'll spend the rest of my life putting it out." Tala rose then, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. "He came back, Father. He killed the one who ordered it. She wouldn't want us to spill more blood." The chief looked at her for a long moment before turning away, his silence heavier than judgment. As the burial began, Elias dropped to his knees. pressing his hands into the wet earth beside Naeli's shroud. "You saved me twice," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Once from death, once from myself." The river wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out over the canyon. Tala came to stand beside him, her hand trembling as it touched his shoulder. "She forgave you long before this," she said. "Now you have to live like you believe it." For the first time, Elias lifted his eyes from the ground. The fire had taken everything he thought could be burned, but somehow, beneath the ashes, something new had begun to breathe. Years passed, and the river forgot the color of blood. Grass grew where the ashes once lay, and children laughed where silence had ruled. Elias built a small cabin near the water's bend, not far from the new Yavapai settlement, and each dawn he walked to the bank to wash his hands in the same current that had carried him to them. Time had lined his face, turned his hair the color of the stones he stacked, but his eyes still searched the horizon at every sunrise, as if waiting for a forgiveness he would never stop earning. Tala lived nearby, her laughter a softer echo of the sister they had lost, her courage tempered by wisdom. She came often with the children, the ones who had grown under both worlds' watch, and each time she brought food, stories, and reminders that life had survived the flames, sometimes in quiet moments. Their hands brushed, and something like peace settled between them. Not the wild love of youth, but a gentler bond built on shared ghosts and unspoken prayers. When Chief Ohan passed, the tribe gathered under the tall pines, and Elias stood among them as one of their own. "The land remembers who keeps it," an elder said that night, looking at him. "You stayed." He nodded, unable to answer. At dawn, he returned to the river and sat where Naeli had once crushed herbs for his wound. The water glittered gold, just as it had the day she swore to heal him, and for a long time he said nothing, only listened to the world as it breathed again. A girl from the village, no older than Tala had been when he first met her, came running to the bank. "Elias," she called, "Tala says supper's ready." He smiled faintly and rose, joints stiff, heart steady. Before leaving, he knelt and placed his palm against the water. "You kept your promise," he whispered. The current pulled softly against his hand, carrying away the words as if the river itself had heard. When he turned toward the cabins and saw smoke curling gently from the chimneys, not the smoke of ruin, but of life continuing, he knew the fire had finally gone out inside him. The river sang low in the distance, not mourning anymore, only remembering. The river carried her memory long after the world forgot her name. When he pressed his hand to that water and whispered her promise, was it her peace he felt, or his own finally coming home? If you were Elias, would you have told the truth sooner, or carried it alone to protect them? Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind.